Good morning, everybody. Welcome to January 24th, 2025 School Board Manatee County Workshop. I'm going to officially call this meeting to order. Moving along in the agenda, there is no agenda amendments to add. Public comments is item number 3. There is no public comments, so we're going to jump right into our content. First item up here on our agenda is the Audit Committee Quarterly Board Review. So you have Mr. Daniels here to give us that Audit Committee report, so take it away. Thank you very much.
Chairman, members, welcome to the new members.
Thanks, Jim.
See some old faces. This is just basically going to be a quick update as to what we're at. We've got an engagement letter come to us from Purvis Gray, who is going to be the outside external auditors for next year. It's probably going to come to you on the board meeting in February 25th, but it is for the internal accounts only. We'll have the Auditor General here doing the full financial audit this year. They're in the first of a 5-year contract, so the next year they will do both. But again, it meets with what was in their proposal. It's been to the audit committee, it's been to the attorney, it's ready to come to you at the right time. As we finish up, though, with CRI, we've got some things waiting on this change in their name contract to go through so they can start signing reports again. The sales surtax report is ready to send to you, but has not yet been signed by them. But it's in purchasing. We'll try and get that cleared out. As they finish up the next several months, we're looking to have them be completed, finished reporting to us on the meeting in May. If that's not possible, we may have them be reporting to us in the July meeting right after the end of the fiscal year. But we're looking at, right now, they're in human resources compliance. It's in process. We're looking at doing a review of the facilities and then following up on all the open items from the previous items of proposed action reports. So we'll be able to close that off as we start in with the new committee, the new internal auditor, which will be RSM. We're supposed to be looking at their letter in the March meeting, and we'll get it processed. First thing we're asking them to do when they come in is to do the risk assessment. Every 5 years, you're required to do a full deep dive risk assessment. So the first thing you're going to do is come in and making everybody upset with them because they're going to be going so deep into it. You can see Ms. Sellers smile. But we won't want to come in and tell them what to do until we've looked at what are the risks, where is the analysis, make sure we do it right and come forward with that. So we're looking at where there's potential problems, not just to do things to do things. CRI is going to finish in the March committee meeting. We're, like I said, looking at that engagement letter. We're also going to do a detailed review. We're in the process where each of us are looking at some of the charter schools and looking at, are they conform, are they there? We're looking at the reports that they're issuing. We're looking at the way they're valuing their assets. We're not saying it's right or wrong. We're looking for consistency. So when our staff goes and evaluates what there's potential risk for or not, they've got apples to apples, not any oranges in there. It's better than it used to be, but there's still, I think, potential. We haven't looked with what we're doing, but we're just trying to make sure they're implementing the new standards on leases and revenue recognition are the two hot elements. And in my work, I've seen schools, churches, some other entities slow to adopt those even though they've already been required, so we're going to check on that. We've got some membership changes. Mr. Wagner, who's been with us, is going to retire as of June 30th, 2025. He's blessed to have a second family in life, and they are graduating from high school, and his wife has told him it's time for us to go travel. And it's, we're going to be sorry to see him, but I am very pleased to have had his counsel. He's been very wise and helped put some of these reports and things through. We are seeking new members. I'm working with Mr. Kennedy on one in particular. I don't know if we haven't talked to her yet, but hopefully have one in place quickly. We're always looking for new candidates. If you talk to somebody, please have them call me. I'll be glad to talk and try and follow up. Our newest board member has come from KPMG, and it's nice to have another auditor in there, so when a question gets asked, we can tell them this is why it's here. It works real well. And with that, I'm open to any questions or to get out of your way and let you dive into the main program.
Anybody?
May? Jim, thanks for the update. And if you could, you mentioned it, but if you could just go into a little bit of detail for the board about the change at CRI that's taking place, just in case. I mean, it's essentially a formality, in my opinion, but just in case it comes up, the board understands like what's happening at CRI internally.
CRI was purchased by an equity fund. What they've done is they've taken the pure audit part of their practice, and they've got a CRI Inc., which is the audit side, and everything else, consulting side, tax side, internal audit side, is all under a new banner and a new umbrella. Well, it's a new legal entity, and before they'll let our people or anybody else sign a report, they want us to have accepted the new legal name for them. It's been through the attorney's office, it's been in purchasing, I understand it's signed, and they're working on a few details. So I'm hoping to have the sales surtax report for you guys to have and get out here real quickly. But it's something that's happening in the industry. Cherry Beckert, who was our previous external auditor, has also been the same type of a transaction. And the impact on that was Sarasota County, I understand, had selected them as their new auditor. And then when this came through and the changes that were involved, they deselected them and selected somebody else. So, I mean, it's an impact on us as a society, as users. You always want to make sure if you're signing something professionally that, you know, it's in the right format, it's in the right name, and it's like you said, it's more of a technicality than anything else for us. The external auditor we got coming in, Purvis Gray, is not part of an equity fund. They've got a lot of young partners, and they've apparently done the transition from one generation to another. That is where a lot of these type of transactions come from. The retiring partners got to get paid. Well, they've brought in a bunch of new ones, and it seems to me, looking at it, that we're going to have a regional Florida firm looking at us for the next 5 years, which gives us, you know, like doing stuff at home. But I hope that answered your question, Mr. Kennedy.
It did. I just want to make sure the board was aware.
Yeah.
It was covered really well. Lori Kidder gave a really good explanation to the committee on the legal process and the whys and hows and how it'll look going forward, but I just want to make sure everybody was at least at touch.
It is definitely going around the industry. I mean, I know in the financial world it's going around. These private equity funds are purchasing,
Anything and everything.
Yeah. So, any other board member questions?
Other than, we just had a real brief conversation that some of the allocations that CRI has, that we want to use, that perhaps portion of those allocations in the CFOC.
It's my understanding there is some funds that we will not be using that were budgeted.
Right,
Use of those is at the board's direction, and I know CFOC has been a target. We've had a short conversation. I'm going to talk to Ms. Kidder, get her contact with the purchasing and see if we can't get that process going.
engagement letter of some sort, right, okay.
For-
Because I know they have been asking for that kind of engagement with their committee as well, so.
I don't know. You tell me better about financial impact.
Could you clarify which fiscal year CFOC is asking to have audited?
I'm guessing the new one.
26?
Right.
Right.
24, 25?
No, yes,
Okay.
They've issued their last
School year.
right,
and the next one.
current school year, right. Because their report is almost done for the last one, so,
Well,
yeah.
it'd be good time to get them involved.
right. And
Process going
right,
this year.
exactly. And then we'll again look at the new auditors that's coming in after we're done with CRI. But if we have the allocations, might as well take advantage of that with the CFOC. Because
Yeah.
they've never had that before, and I think this is a good opportunity for them to have that exposure. Okay?
Yeah.
Thanks,
Cut
Jeff.
you off. And,
No, that's no problem at all. Just two things. Jim, as you're probably aware, we approved the ACFR at Tuesday night's meeting. and I didn't get a chance to say this yet, but to Rachel and your team, I appreciate, I know this
Oh,
was
yes.
It's a lot.
hundreds of hours of
Yeah.
work in your team, so thank you for that. And Jim, I know you and your team are instrumental as well in the
I
kind
add
of
on to
second set of
that.
eyes.
The auditors like working here because two things. Number one, there's very rarely an adjusting entry. It's that clean. And the other thing is that the staff here writes their own financial statements. At a lot of districts this size and smaller, the auditor has to come in and physically help write it, and Rachel's team did a magnificent job.
Yeah, no, it's really well done.
Thank you.
I always find the intro really interesting to see how the demographics and size of the district has changed.
Yes.
We're up over, we're at 56,000
Yep.
students now, according to the report, so.
I
That's-
first started working with the district back when Gene Witt was superintendent and doing some things, internal audit style stuff, looking at this or that had come up. And the district changes between now and then. It's just like driving down the street here in Manatee County. It just changes.
Yeah, we can't widen the streets fast enough.
Right.
And Chad, if I could, one more thing. This is just a request, since Skip Wagner is retiring. If we could do just a short recognition for him
Sure.
at the June meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Because Skip's been on the committee for at least 4 or 5 years. Right?
He's done 2 cycles.
Yeah, okay, two cycles, 2 terms, yeah, so.
terms.
Yeah,
I'd-
I got that now.
I'd
Yep.
appreciate that. Okay,
Cool.
thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, one more.
Oh,
Keep
I'm
going.
sorry.
So I just want to make sure I understand, the state is coming in to do their, is it every 3-year audit?
Every 3
5-year
years,
audit?
they
Every
do the
3 years?
external audit.
Okay,
yes.
when will they be showing up on the property?
We'll
approximately?
probably be getting around April,
Okay.
when they're doing the risk assessment and when they're getting ready to get started. They'll hold an entrance conference with the superintendent and myself and some staff.
And that's the office you used to work for, Ms.
Yeah.
Sellers, is that correct?
Their
Okay.
operational audit will start first,
Mhm.
because they have, the financials, they'll wait till after the closing of the June 30, but, so they actually do an operational audit besides the financial and single audit.
So could you define those terms, operational audit, single audit?
So an
financial
operational,
audit?
it'll be a separate report, and it basically covers some procedures and compliance, like laws and rules, regulations, requirements in literally every area that they have assessed risk that they apply to for their, for all of the districts that are having operational audits in that, for that fiscal year. And then a separate report, like the big 189-page ACFR, they audit that as well. So we'll get 2 audit reports from them.
Okay. And then is CRI coming in again this year to do? what kind of-
CRI, if I may, is finishing up what we have under the previous contract. There ends June 30th. It will be finished at June 30th, and we'll have the new internal auditors, RSM, beginning that risk assessment on July 1.
So when I hear the word internal audit, what that means to me is auditing the accounts at the different schools. Is that?
The school internal accounts
Okay.
audits.
Okay.
School
That's,
internal.
that
Just,
is
I'm not
RSM.
criticizing Mr. Daniels, I'm just trying
sir,
to
it's
keep
a
all
good
these
question.
terms.
It's a very
Yeah.
good question. We have engaged CRI
Mhm.
to do things like the sales tax, surtax audit,
Okay.
look at various areas. We've been into purchasing, we've been into various areas. We went over to the financial aid over at MTI. They're a professional firm that does work as a, instead of staff, you use them for your internal work.
Right,
Now, the internal accounts are all the schools.
okay,
It's done by the external auditor. We have at times used CRI to go in and do some additional stuff when a high school principal changes or when there's been some issues in the past with somebody that, in the way they were terminated, just to do a little more detailed than what they're going to do when they pass through the entire group of schools. We're not doing that this year. Everything looks well, the reports are coming in. We didn't feel we needed to have them go spend that time this year, in addition to what the Cherry Beckert had done. We went through their report, looked at their management items, and, felt it was in good shape. So, I hope that answered your question.
yeah.
They essentially are staff for the district to do audit functions that an internal staff would do
And
if we had it.
the state statute requires that we either have a we have an internal auditor or that we have a company that does this
Yes.
function for us, is that right?
It states that there's some functions that we have to do,
Right,
and of the size and the nature of what we're doing, and especially with the sales tax audit, and now the CFOC audit, we felt it's been worth engaging a professional firm that
Right.
does those type of services rather than just a generic firm to come in.
okay.
That was why we went through that procedure to make selections, and have chosen a new firm, another firm to come in and maybe change the flavor of what we're
Yeah.
doing a little bit. They essentially work for you,
Right.
through us.
So the audits at Cherry Beckert, how are they different from the audits at CRI?
They're the audits of that big 189-page report,
Thing right here?
financial.
Okay.
Just, this is the financial results.
Mhm.
We look more at procedures, operationally, like she's talking about to a certain extent. We try to come out with a group of recommendations that improves the function that we're looking at. And one of the things that's really nice about coming in with a new auditor is we've been through a lot of the areas of the district and they're working well. And so that's one of the reasons we're not spending our entire budget. We've tried to look at where we can do something positive, do something effective without just going out and spending time. And we'll be doing that going forward.
So I should probably know this, but apparently is CRI and Cherry Beckert are not our auditing companies anymore? Or, because you
They have
said,
not.
We
No,
changed them.
changed.
we
That's what
probably
we-
voted on that a while ago then.
Yeah, we did.
So who is our,
Our external auditors are named Purvis Gray.
and they're
They're
replacing
headquartered out
Cherry
of
Beckert?
Gainesville.
right?
They're the ones that'll come on the 25th
Okay,
of February. At least that's the tentative schedule at this time.
okay,
The other one is RSM out of Orlando. They're going to be doing the internal work, essentially working for you.
Okay.
We're going to get their engagement letter in the March meeting to look at and work with purchasing to get it ready to come to you. But they both start July 1.
so when this current contract is over, I assume it goes through the end of June. Cherry Beckert and CRI are still performing work for us, but when that's,
They should be done.
they're done.
Yeah.
They're all done
And
with
that's what I'm
it.
saying, we're trying to get CRI to be, the reports in, everything
Okay.
finished, all the follow-up. So when we hit July 1, we're done.
Okay.
I don't like carryover and it
And
never,
the-
I know Mrs.
So the
Self doesn't like
company
carryover.
the company that's replacing CRI again, its name is?
Is RSM.
Okay. And
They're
then,
they're an outgrowth of the RSM McGladrey Group, is the number 5 CPA firm in the country.
okay. And then the one replacing Cherry Beckert?
Is called Purvis Gray.
Okay.
They're a regional CPA firm out of Gainesville, Tallahassee, an office here. They do what, 600 schools, districts around, I think, not just in Florida, but that's too many. I'm sorry, that number's incorrect. There aren't 600 districts. But they do quite a large number of the Florida districts. We will be a large one for them. They do a lot of the smaller districts, but they have very experienced staff that all they do are the governmental audits. It's a-
So Purvis Gray will be doing something similar to what the state is coming
Yes.
in to do, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then the other company that replaced CRI will be doing more specific audits within, where we see risk within the organization, right?
And some
we
reports.
target specific areas.
We have the sales tax report, which is mandated.
Okay.
Now we're going to have the CFOC, which is mandated. So there's certain areas, there's certain other areas that some of the statutes say we need to look at through the year. We'll do that. And then look at that risk assessment and see where we have potential problems.
And Purvis Gray does an annual kind of financial audit, is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, sir.
And the state comes in every 3 years and does their operational audit, I think.
Yes.
And a financial audit. Does Purvis Gray do an operational audit, or is it just financial?
Not of that nature, no.
None of that nature. Okay.
That would, if there's operational issues, that's where RSM would be engaged to go take a look at specific areas.
Okay.
We've had that in the past where we've gone and looked at the procedures and come back and recommended they change, and we do things to have better controls and transparency.
So just overall comment, I think it's a good thing that we have this internal audit function that's kind of guided towards specific risk areas, that we have an annual financial audit. from an outside company that's not associated with the school system, and then that the state comes in every 3 years, and that in one of those years, there's actually a backup audit to kind of try and
Yes.
confirm what the annual audit says. So
Yes.
I think that's a good structure to hopefully keep us financially, fiscally sound. I trust the people that are running the show, but doesn't, just like in the Air Force, you know, that the Inspector General just shows up one day and says, "Show me your books," right? So that's
Like Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify.
there you go. I like it. Okay. Thank you for your time, Chairman. That's all I
Yeah,
have.
absolutely. Anybody else?
No,
No? Ms. Daniels, thank you very much.
thank you.
Appreciate all your work.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, stay warm.
Yes.
All right, item number 2 is the 24-25 Fast Progress Monitoring 2 for mathematics. And Dr. Weiss, I want to kick it to you before giving it to Mr. Jensen.
Good morning, Chairman and board members. As I shared at our last meeting, we typically do these progress monitoring reports to the board at full board meetings. But of course, we had the graduation data that came out, and so we did that on Tuesday night. This particular data set, Progress Monitor 2 for math, is a little more complex, really for 2 reasons. The first is, and again, our students took these tests in December, and then we used the break to kind of churn the data, and have been working with the schools to make adjustments to instruction and move forward. But keep in mind that when our students took these assessments in December, they had lost a full 7 days of instruction due to the cumulative, Helene and Milton absences, because our makeup days are on the hind end of the calendar, and so we're a full week of instruction behind where we typically would be. So the data's a bit noisier there. And then also there were some methodology changes that we chose to make this year that impacts how you look at the data in the aggregate. So for that reason, this is going to be a little bit more of an in-depth presentation, and my recommendation, board members, is that we ask questions slide by slide instead of waiting for the end, because there's a lot of context. And if you just take the numbers without the context, you can head in the wrong direction. There's good news in this data. There's some work to do in this data, but you have to really get the context. It's a little bit of a noisier data set. So Mr. Jensen is going to take the lead as our Deputy Superintendent for Instruction, but sitting next to him is Mr. McCarthy, our Assessment and Research Director, and we are so fortunate to have him and his brilliance. Every time I ask him to pull a data set together, what I get back is 3 steps further than what I envisioned. And so it's always enlightening, but he'll help provide some context if you have questions. And as you know, we've got an awesome curriculum team. Our 2 curriculum directors at elementary and secondary, and the folks who work for them, they would love to be here today, but we ask that they continue their work in schools so that we don't lose more time supporting teachers and students. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Jensen and Mr. McCarthy, and we look forward to walking through the data with you.
Absolutely. Good morning, Chair Cho, board members, Superintendent Weissong. We're thrilled to be with you today, and like Dr. Weissong said, this is a really comprehensive look at our FAST assessment testing, as well as our PM2 math results. Mr. McCarthy's team has put together just some really deep and fantastic ways of looking at data that, like Dr. Weissong said, can be a little noisy because of the way math acceleration works in the state. So we're going to kind of walk you through what we normally do, which is just kind of an overview of FAST and the progress monitors, get into what we do in math acceleration in the district, and then go grade band by grade band, looking at the data and kind of explaining what we're seeing in the data. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll also share kind of next steps, how we're using this data to make the instructional decisions to really drive improvement across our system for the second semester. So We're going to spend the first few slides talking through FAST, and Mr. McCarthy, like Dr. Weissong said, our Director of Assessment, Accountability, and Research, will take that away.
Morning, Chair, Board, Superintendent. So we have 3 major testing windows as part of FAST in Florida. There's the fall one, which we do in September. There's the December and January one, which we're finishing up right now. We call PM2, and then there will be one again in the spring. My department, we work with the schools for all testing. So we start off training them in the fall. We kind of lay out here are what we think are the best testing windows within each state testing window, because they give us like 2-month-long windows sometimes. So you're trying to look strategically, is it better to test math or ELA before Christmas or after Christmas? And we're try to work with the schools and figure out what works best with that. And then we do our best to answer their questions as they come up and kind of support every one of the schools as they're dealing with the student pulled out a cell phone or what else happened during testing that's not supposed to happen. So we can try to get as good a testing administration and as useful of data for our teachers and schools and district to look at by the end of the window. There are 2 major testing platforms Florida uses as part of their FAST testing system. The biggest one is Cambium Assessment. That's for math at least, it's 3 through 8 mathematics. That's the one Florida's been using for years with testing and transitioned into continuing to use now 3 times a year instead. Then in K through 2 testing, as well as in pre-K for early literacy, we use the STAR or Renaissance platforms as part of the FAST testing system as well.
You say to ask questions as we're going along?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, so real quick on this first slide, we're already getting into questions, all right? I guess I'm surprised that there's not a state testing system. These are actually private companies, and we can choose, like there's companies out there to do the testing for us, or?
Yeah, so the state put out a contract, or I guess a request for bids or whatever a few years ago. And I don't think anybody at the time could provide everything. And so they actually worked out a contract with Cambium, who had partnered up with Renaissance to do the grade levels Cambium was not at the time equipped to do.
But to answer your question, these are used by every district in the state. So this is the state's selection for the vendors who provide this service, and it's used throughout the entire state, every district.
That was my question, because if we use Renaissance and Cambium for testing, and then Broward County uses Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones's, like, how do we know that they're equivalent when we're,
Yeah, we're all on the same platform.
we're all on the
across
same,
state.
that's what I wanted to know. Okay, great, thank you, that's all I have.
Real quick. Evan, I assume since we have that flexibility in the testing windows, due to the hurricane days off, have we tended to push everything to the end of that window?
There are trade-offs. So especially when you get the winter window where there's winter break right in the middle of it, which is not.
True.
So the question is, do you, like the discussion we have every year when we look at scheduling, especially for PM2 in winter, is it better to schedule before break when students haven't had 2 weeks off to completely check out and forget everything that they were taught up until that point, or to wait until the end of the window? So you've got time versus knowledge, right? Knowledge being still stored in there.
There's also a number of other assessments being given during that window. We have district benchmark assessments being given in different subject areas. Teachers are giving final exams in certain subjects. And so Mr. McCarthy's team really tries to take in all of those different variables and produce an annual assessment calendar that works for schools, because we know the enormous burden all this assessment places on our teachers, our students, and our administrative staffs. And so it's trying to meet the needs of our schools while administering the assessments we need to administer and collecting the data we need to collect.
Yeah, really too, I would add props to our support employees and some of those roles, because when there's a teacher out, they get pulled off their regular duty to go help proctor some exams. One other question too I have is obviously 3rd through 10th grade ELA and math. Those are happening, correct me if I'm wrong, those are happening between PM2 and PM3 mostly? Or does PM3, I mean, May of 2025, it feels like ELA especially, it always felt like it started like in mid-March, early April.
So when they went to the FAST schedule, and I think actually a couple years before that, they compressed everything so you couldn't start spring testing until May. So the only thing that happens before May at this point, or before May 1st, anything that's like 3 through 10 are part of the school grades formula specifically can't start till May 1st.
Okay, I didn't know that. Thank you.
So writing will start in April because it takes a little longer for those adaptive programs to
grade it.
explore
Yep.
everybody's writing responses,
Yep.
as well as K through 2 opens slightly early, but not much.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
If I can add the other, related to testing windows, I think the other consideration is time to intervene, right? And so the advantage of giving the math in December, even though we're 7 days of instruction behind, is that our principals and teachers came back on January 6th, ready to go with intervention plans in place for math, which is the area where more hours of instruction can have a larger impact on student growth scores, right? Versus reading, where you're dealing with more global skills. And so, I think, again, there's trade-offs and every district does it a little differently. But I think we're in a good place. And board members, when you consider the calendar, and we had all the principals together on Tuesday, and really the guidance that we're providing is that they're in the critical segment right now. We're in day 4 of a 19-day sprint to President's Day, all uninterrupted instructional time. And 3 of you as former classroom teachers know that March and April is just a series of starts and stops in the classroom. Right now, we're in the sweet spot. And so we feel like our math teachers have all the data they need to have made those adjustments. And as I told the principals, this 19-day window is 11% of the school year. But if they're on it, if they're in the zone, we can get 25% of our gains out of this sprint to President's Day. So that's why getting that math in before the holidays was so important.
That's great. Okay. So I'm sure some of you have seen this slide a lot of times. This is the state's computer adaptive testing picture. Biggest things we kind of want to talk about with computer adaptive testing is, so every dot on this slide represents a question. If it's green, it's a question a student would have gotten right. If it's red, a student would have gotten it wrong. And then the other big thing that I think most people don't notice right away is the blue bars behind every question. While the test is looking at whether a student's getting a question right and trying to decide should they get a harder question or an easier question next to try to figure out where they are, it's also in the background coming up with kind of a potential score estimate for each student and kind of trying to narrow in on where it thinks the student actually is for that kind of final score estimate at the end of the test that it then spits out for our teachers and parents and students to see.
So you can see those blue bars that Mr. McCarthy referenced getting smaller and smaller as the test progresses, representing greater confidence in the student score output at the end of the adaptive assessment.
Oh, question.
So one of the questions that teachers and parents ask is, okay, so as the computer adaptive testing, meaning that it changes the questions based on student response, is that right? It makes them easier or harder based on student responses from the beginning through to the end. So the concern that teachers and parents have is that, okay, your kid's doing okay, they've got lots of greens going on here, but then the questions get harder and harder and harder, and is this going to affect the student's score? Because now they're getting a lot more reds as we get to the top of this middle of this chart. Does that mean now their score is going to go down? Is it going to affect their ability to move on to their next grade level? Is it going to affect their grades? And all of those questions, because if the computer is making the test harder,
Right.
as the child is taking that test, it seems to be moving the finishing line while they're in the middle of the race.
That's a wonderful question. I think, computer adaptive testing, and Mr. McCarthy can give you a more technical explanation than I'll ever be able to. But you can kind of see it on this chart, right? As the blue bar kind of represents the range of possibilities for the student score and where that question could kind of be pulled from and the range of difficulty, let's say. Mm-hmm. And so as the test progresses, that kind of range of difficulty gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So yes, all those students are getting tougher questions, which may represent that they're doing extremely well on the test,
Right.
and a reason why we have to coach our students to be resilient on these tests, but also understand that just because something is hard doesn't mean you're performing poorly. But a question that you get wrong at the end, you can see, moves you down less, and this is a great segue into the next couple slides, than a question you get wrong in the beginning.
So I have a question then.
Go ahead. I think Mr.
No, I'm good. I wanted to ask
Oh, it's the same one?
Heather was on the same wavelength, yep. So I'm good.
So after hearing that conversation, my brain says something to the effect of, well, you could get 8 out of 10 moderate to easy questions right and get a 3, or you might only get 5 out of 10 hard questions right and get a 2. Is that a possibility, or you know what I mean? Like
So when they're scoring the test, they're looking at a couple things with a question. You know about the question difficulty, like hard versus easy questions. After they first administer every question, they usually like field test them a year before, take the results from how students did on that, and they look at how difficult was the question, as in how many students got it right. And then they also like to look at things like what is the correlation between whether a student got this question right and how they did overall. And so a question that your overall high students get right more often than your low students get right, has a good correlation there, is probably a better question for differentiating what a student knows. And so kind of based on all that information, they give every question kind of different point values towards the overall test score. So like if you got, usually if you get a couple of hard questions right, they might outweigh a lot of easy questions being answered right.
So it's not just 8 out of 10 you pass,
Yeah.
7 out of 10
Yeah,
you pass.
it's not. Yeah, so like kind of going back to the student being concerned that they're missing questions. We got that question a lot from especially our higher performing and higher achieving students that are used to getting 90 or 100% on every test they take,
Right.
because that test is set usually in the kind of medium range a lot of
Right,
times
yeah.
for what you're looking for in a class, not necessarily this one where the range just goes all the way from the easiest possible question they can think of up to something at the insane stretched point of standard mastery.
Like the best way to think about it, and it's kind of, I think, why it's difficult sometimes for our families to grasp, is we're all used to, you have a 10-question quiz,
Right.
each question's worth a point, you get 9 out of 10, you get an A, you get a 90%, right? But that's not the way this assessment is built. Like, you might have a question that's worth 0.1 points because it's very easy,
Right.
and then you might have a very hard question that's worth 4 points and far outweighs the other points. So the questions, like Mr. McCarthy said, are kind of weighted for difficulty,
Yeah.
and that helps inform the score generation model.
I figured that was the case, is that harder questions got more points if you got them right, and then there's some magic formula that DOE has, right? It's super secret inside a locked vault somewhere. And, do you understand it, or do you?
Yeah, it's pretty. There's some pretty standardized formulas out there. There's just different ways that they're applied. So
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
I'd also like to remind everyone that Mr. McCarthy is an economics major.
Ms. Bray had a quick
Oh,
question.
absolutely.
To your point of one question might be worth 0.1 of a point, where the other might be worth 4.0. We're communicating that to our students, I'm hoping, so they understand, you know, it's gonna be easy, but you're gonna have hard ones too, and okay. I just wanna make sure, because I guess I don't remember hearing that before in this particular platform, but great explanation, because I wasn't sure how that was measured. Because I see that chart, you know, and how it's all weighted out, but that's a better explanation to me.
I think that's the benefit of occasionally taking the time to do this in a workshop format, so we
Yes.
can dig deeper into some of these
Right.
pieces. But Mr. McCarthy's team produces training documents for teachers and for administrators, that, in the hopes that they'll share those with students as well, to try to just, again, it's not about what's worth, you know, this number of points and what's worth that number of points. I think it's about the resiliency mindset,
Right.
and putting in your best effort and not being discouraged. So it's about building those skills in students, and also just helping them understand what they're going to see, what they're going to expect. Our teachers do a wonderful job of making sure they connect, as we're reading multiple sources and we're writing an essay that's, synthesizing those sources and comparing and contrasting them. We produce this amazing artifact in class, but then how is this knowledge that we've gained and done in class going to be assessed at the end of the year? And how do we help students understand how to translate what we just did into the end of year expectations? That's a big piece of it.
And to Mr. Tatum's point about the assessment companies, the state puts out bids, just like we put out bids here. And the two that they selected for this particular one is in Arlington, Virginia, because I wanted to know these things. And the other one, the Renaissance, is in, was two different U.S. bases, one in Wisconsin, Rapids, Wisconsin, and Bloomington, Minnesota. I think that's interesting to know where we're actually using our vendors from. So I just thought this kind of fun fact.
Before Mr. Jensen goes to the next slide, I think this conversation about resiliency is really important. These are tests of math and English language arts. They are also tests of stamina and endurance.
Yeah.
And if I could suddenly beam every parent in this school district into a massive auditorium, that's what we would talk about. That those conversations at home, and remember, I'm a parent of a middle school student, right? This may be the most boring passage you've ever read, but you've got to get through it and you've got to answer the question and move on, because your answer to that question is charting the path for the rest of the test. And so we've got to teach all of that too. The advantage of the computer adaptive testing, to Mr. Kennedy's earlier question, this is why we can get all of PM3 done in May, have scores back to parents much more quickly than before, and in a normal year, why we now we'll get school grades by June 30th instead of in August or September or October. So in the aggregate, the system works well, but we've got to help families understand that growth mindset is half of this battle.
Gentlemen, I just want to go back to the schedule again. Well, not the schedule, but the sequence of the tests real quick. So the progress monitoring questions, those are provided by the state. Every kid in the state's taking the same progress monitoring 1, 2, 3, right? Okay. Same thing, obviously, with the FAST testing. So the district benchmarks that we, I don't even want to call them a test, because is it still like 8 or 10 questions, district benchmarks?
They're a little longer than that.
Oh, a little longer? Okay. So since we now have PM 1, 2, and 3 data, have we thought about or considered, like, do we need to, what I'm getting at,
I think
can we
I know what you're
reduce
asking.
benchmark testing?
We
due to
have.
PM 1, 2, and 3, and we already have.
Yeah. So at the first year of FAST, we did kind of overlap the ELA and math. We no longer do any ELA or math benchmarks in the state assessed areas. So the only math benchmarks we're doing at this point are Algebra 1 and Geometry, which the state does not include in progress monitoring.
Gotcha.
Right now.
Oh, great.
So we have our FAST assessments, and we really rely on the results of these to inform our instruction. And like Mr. McCarthy said, we're not delivering additional assessments in these areas. It's areas like algebra, geometry, U.S. history, civics, biology, things that don't have progress monitoring assessments, where we still use those benchmarks as our internal progress monitor.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay. A lot has happened since I've been gone.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
States changed a lot in this transition to the best standards in FAST assessments.
No, it's interesting. I appreciate I know these sound like dumb questions, but I appreciate you walking me through it.
No, and again, I think because we have 2 new board members on the board, and we haven't done one of these data presentations
okay.
since you've joined the board. I think this is a great format to go through this.
Yeah, thank you.
I had a question.
Oh, sorry.
So I was at the end of FSA testing. I was doing juniors and seniors, so we weren't doing FAST. So FAST had started. I was with kids who still needed the FSA to graduate when I left teaching. So I haven't been trained in FAST as a teacher. So, but one of the things that my colleagues were frequently talking about was how much testing they're now doing. When they were phasing out the FSA, and I took it with a huge grain of salt when the state said, oh, there's going to be so much less testing. Another topic. But anyway, so they said it's going to be less testing. You're not going to have to do all these tests at the end of the year. And now we're testing them 3 times during the year instead of once at the end of the year, which seems like a lot more testing to me. So how much time do these tests actually take? I mean, we'd set them down for FSA and it'd be 90 minutes for this, and it would be 120 minutes for that, and it would be whatever. How long are these tests?
So there have been a couple of kind of trade-offs of back and forth since the switch. So like Derek said, we're not doing the district benchmarks in these anymore. So we cut out some district assessments, which was part of the state's goal of doing statewide ones. So there's some trade-off there. We traded one for the other there. One of the other big goals of the state FAST testing transition was to shrink the number of testing days. So instead of, like, it used to be an ELA, like the 10th grade ELA test or 9th grade ELA test, it used to basically be 3 days of testing.
Yeah.
Because you had a writing section that had to be 1 day, then you had the first section of ELA, then you had the second section of reading, or the first section of reading, second section of reading, which also made it a nightmare to try to get some of those concordance scores in for graduates, because if they miss 1 out of 3, they don't have a score.
Yes.
Now we're down to 1 day of testing. It's so much easier to catch a kid for 1 day of testing than it is for 3 separate days.
Do you know how long the ELA?
Time-wise, these are slightly shorter recommended windows, or recommended testing times. I say recommended because within halfway through the year of our first year of implementing FAST, they went from here's how long the test session is to telling us, you know what, students can work up till the end of the day to finish the test.
Okay,
So
so it
you
was,
get into
let's say 90 minutes, and then now it's like, well, they're not getting done in time, so we'll just let them.
Yeah, so which I think is they're looking at the trade-off of, do we want to know what a student actually knows or their relative ability to other students? Because if you're trying to look at how they compare to other students, you would just lock down the test time, and a student that can't finish a test in that time, that tells you something too. They want to know what a student actually knows on the standards and benchmarks that the state's asking this student.
So the vast majority of students finish within that kind of 90-minute window, but then students who do need the extra time, one, either because of accommodations or just because the student feels like they need extra time on the exam, they can take through the rest of the day.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's less stressful, not having that clock.
All right.
Very much.
Okay, so kind of continuing the conversation around how adaptive testing works. Like I said, there's both figuring out whether you should get a harder or easier question next going on. There's a score estimate going on, and we kind of wanted to show you with this slide. You can see the score estimates, and on this slide we put to the left side of it the kind of where the levels would fall, and really just kind of want to point out with this, if you look at it, there's a massive level 1 range, smaller level 2 range, tiny level 3 range, slightly larger level 4 range, and then a massive level 5 range, because the state achievement levels are, at least originally, were assigned on kind of a normal distribution or bell curve, where most of your students are in that really tiny cut in the middle for level 3, and there's just really long tails out the side with very few students in them for level 1s and level 5s in theory. So the other thing this is also showing really well is, like, in general, a student's going to start with like kind of an easy to medium easy question when they go into a computer adaptive test, and you can see here they get the question right. They go up to a much harder. The test is like, okay, we know they're not down here at the bottom of the scale, so let's give them a much harder question and kind of try to figure out, are they up there or are they somewhere else? And so just kind of, for a while, it just jumps high, low to try to narrow in where a student is. And so you can see it's moving a lot more early on in the test, and then getting much smaller shifts later on in the test as it gets more sure of where things are.
Yeah, Chad, if I may. I would imagine over the course of the test, it's going to be able to weed out a student who is a good guesser or gets lucky on a couple tough ones, because by the end of 20, 30 questions,
Oh, yeah.
nobody can maintain that kind of success rate randomly.
It's much harder to guess on these than it used to be.
I have a question. Did I hear in a conversation, I forget where I heard it, that right now during our PM2, that maybe we'll get into this, but that there were some questions on the test and we hadn't covered the subject matter areas yet? It seems like fractions or something.
Oh, yeah.
Is it-
That'll be an upcoming slide specifically about third grade this year. But yes, these are whole year tests. So even the test the student takes in August, before they've been exposed to almost any of the material in the
Right.
course, is on all of the benchmarks that will be covered the year in that course. And so it's a great indicator of kind of a starting point, and this is a great midpoint, but these aren't intended to be used as like an evaluation of how the student's done in the course, because
Right.
even with the data we're showing you today, the student still has more than half a year left of learning to do. And so this is a kind of a point in time, and then our teachers and students can use this to inform instruction and make moves to support students through the rest of the year, and they'll lead up to the PM3, which is the high stakes assessment. So this is not intended to be used as a comprehensive view. Oh, if you're a level 2 on PM2, then you're a level 2 at the end of the year. That's not how it works. We do see growth throughout the course of the year as the student acquires more content in class.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so this slide, kind of similar to the last slide, but what we really want to show here is what happens if a student misses their first couple of questions with a computer adaptive test. So, like Derek was saying, it's not like the classic 10-question quizzes and tests we think of where everything's worth equal points, especially when it's an adaptive test and it's adapting to what you've answered correctly versus incorrectly. If you miss your first couple questions, that score estimate in the background is going to drop. You're going to get easier and easier lower value questions that are not going to help you get back up to a higher score. So effectively with the computer adaptive test, those first questions become, they're not like technically weighted, but because of how the test works,
Sure.
they're
Important.
more impactful than some of the questions are later on. And it gets kind of hard to dig your way back out of a ditch like that.
This will come into importance when we talk about fractions soon.
Okay. So we wanted to stop here to talk about the state family portal. One of the state's big goals with the switch to FAST and the kind of regular state progress monitoring was to be able to communicate to both, especially to parents, a little more frequently and hopefully from the state, like consistently and clearly from the state, feedback on how their students are doing. So if for any of our parents in the district, I'm one, if you go into our Focus parent portal, on the home page of it, you'll see in kind of in the middle, right above how your students' grades and attendance, there's a little link to the state that says Florida State Assessments or something. And it'll clicks you through to the state family portal, which has very specific information on how your student did on each parse monitoring. And I think it's going to store every single year's worth of FAST as it goes forward. And then there are places where they can click and see on this kind of body of knowledge or standard or benchmark, my student did like this, and you can kind of really, and then there's specific feedback for your students and how you can work with them at home and things like that too.
And the parents get the results very quickly after the administration.
Are they able to access that from their phones
Yeah.
easily? Because not everybody has computers.
Yeah, so actually I was looking at it on my phone the other day to show it to my wife.
Okay.
Anything.
Yeah, once you get into the click through to the family portal from Focus, it worked really well on the phone.
Okay.
It's a nice
Not
adaptive.
everything is
Yeah.
as compatible on a phone as it is on
Yeah.
a computer, so I wanted to check.
And kind of part of that, one thing we kind of wanted to talk about is kind of understanding, and what we've talked about with this is mid-year results or PM1 or PM2 results. The state's not expecting a student to be fully mastered at full mastery of standards yet. This is kind of a checkpoint along the way to see, what information a student knows already, what unfinished learnings they have coming up, and kind of look at that stuff. So it's not, every once in a while some calls make it through to me that I have a parent that's really worried their student's not already at a level 4 or 5 at PM1 or PM2, and that doesn't mean anything at PM1 or PM2 because your student they haven't had a chance to learn the information yet. It's coming later on.
Right.
I have a question on this, please. So on that slide, after the yellow highlighted area, it says, these results are for informational purposes only and should not be used to identify areas that may need additional
Should be
instruction and
used.
And
support.
should be.
Should be used.
It should be used. No, maybe my eyes didn't work. Okay. These results are for informational purposes only and should be used to identify, there you go, should be used to identify areas that may need additional instruction and support. Can you give us an example? Let's say Jimmy Jones scores a 1.5 or whatever. So what happens? What does a teacher do with Jimmy Jones's score and what happens?
That's a great question. In
Glad I asked
addition
that
to producing a lot of the data you'll see today, which is really like global data kind of rolled up across our whole district, which when it comes to classroom decision making isn't particularly useful. Mr. McCarthy also produces, and teachers have access to in the portal as well, benchmark level data for their students. So they can see all the students in their class and they can say, Johnny struggled on these number sense and operations benchmarks, but did really well on these algebraic reasoning ones. And so then they can identify specific benchmarks that the student struggled with and maybe their whole class struggled with in general, and then reteach those, pull small groups for intervention. That's when it's that like granular level of student and benchmark data that is the most useful for instructional purposes. But the raw level, like you identified on its own, isn't particularly useful to tailor instruction with.
So we do that, Mr. McCarthy does that for us, kind of takes the data and makes it more useful for our teachers, let's put it that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that, I was hopeful I'd heard that's what we were doing. That literally, we can take these scores and, like you said, break them out into did well in fractions, didn't do real well in algebraic equations, and then almost individually target students or small groups of students and figure out what they need. That's really good.
The last slide kind of identifies some of the things we're doing moving forward in the deck. One of those is like our curriculum team, like Dr. Weissong said, is absolutely amazing. They've created a number of small little 5-question formative assessments that are aligned to each of these benchmarks, a couple of them each that are in our computer-based platform. And so when a teacher says, okay, I have students or a whole class that have struggled with this particular benchmark, let me do some reteaching on it, and then let's just give them a short little 5-question check on it, and then I can see if they've made progress from where they were at. So that's kind of the instructional cycle we really want our schools to be in is, all right, we've identified based on PM2 some areas of need, let's do some remediation, reteaching, and then let's check where we're at and make next steps from there.
Great, thank you.
Just to your point here, the last sentence does say these results should not be considered student achievement designations. So that's where I think it should not.
Okay, great, thanks.
One more thing. I just want to say that I really appreciate the work your team does to dissect all of this data. With FSA, they just gave us the basics and we had to dissect it ourselves. And when you've got 150 students, that's a lot of data to sift.
Yeah. Back in the day, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was hard. I'm like, okay, so, these kids did well in this and these kids did well in this, and you got to look at all of the different components, and to have you guys break that down for the teachers is really a fabulous asset, and I really appreciate that work.
We've been working hard every year to try to get more and more, I like the word actionable, because I remember when I first started thinking, oh, we just present the percentage of students at each achievement level. That means nothing to a teacher.
Nothing.
So we're slowly trying to dig as far down as possible so it's something that they actually can use to inform instruction, to make decisions at the classroom level, not just so we can look at things in the district.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much.
And like you said, Ms. Felton, it's really important that our teachers and school leaders understand how this data works, right? And how we arrive at this data and how it can be used. But as far as hand calculating the data and taking their time to do that, we want them teaching, we want them working
Right.
with students. And so whatever we can do as a leadership team to take that responsibility off teachers so they can use their expertise to put that data into action is, I think, the best and highest use of their time.
And it makes it faster for the teachers too to just get right to it. They don't have to spend a week sifting before they can put it into action.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is an example of one of the state parent reports that's available in the portal if a parent clicks through it. And generally give some information about the score, what the score means, how that score compares to other students at the school, the district, or the state. And I really like on this slide in particular, I want to point out that kind of notes for family section, because especially if it's a student in grades 3 through 5, that section would includes information on if are they eligible for the New Worlds Reading Initiative that gives them a book every month. So maybe their reading's not great, but they can get a free monthly book sent to them to help them improve their reading. Are they eligible for the tutoring scholarship? The kind of same thing. It's kind of helpful resources for parents. And this is another one of the state parent reports. What really here the most valuable part is over on the right in the green section, the kind of achievement level descriptions. This is where it starts drilling down very specifically into what a student, in trying to communicate to a student or a parent their student actually knows, with specific things and how they're, okay, they may have come in at this achievement level. Why are they defined at this achievement level? What things do they know? What things do they not know?
I just have a question. So this is what a parent can see?
Yeah.
See, I don't have children in school, so I don't have that kind of access. So this, when they go in to look at what their student's doing or their child, this is exactly what they see?
This is what they would see in grades 3 through 10.
Right.
It's a little
right, so
different
it'd be
for
different.
K2.
Right,
But
okay.
there's still really useful things in K2, and in general there'll be tabs of here's your overall thing, and then there'll be like click on your detailed report. Click through it, it'll give you a breakdown, and then there'll be options to click on category results or things like that. And you can see a ridiculous number of specifics about how your student did on specific things.
And this is
what they
exactly
know.
what a teacher sees about their student. Right, okay. Awesome.
This is the school. This kind of touching on the school grade components for the 24-25 year. Kind of we're talking about everything in orange, since we're doing our PM2 math, we should have all the light blue stuff, all the reading things coming up in a couple weeks. But here you can kind of see how all the math data will eventually feed into the school grades.
Evan, learning gains, what two checkpoints is that gain measured between?
So currently under statute, the gains are measured from spring to spring. So it'll be spring of last year to spring of this year.
So PM3 to PM3?
So yeah,
Correct.
yes,
Yep,
Sounds fair.
yeah.
yeah.
So I'll take over from here as we start getting into the data. Like Dr. Weissong said, a few important considerations for the data. And again, I would say these aren't excuses, but always important context, because like any data set, it's important to, especially a data set around kind of human performance and in human systems, context is really important so that we don't misinterpret data or make false assumptions based on what we see in the data. So like Dr. Weissong said, we did lose 7 net instructional days, so that's almost 10% of the first semester due to hurricane impacts. And of course, students in many other districts, so when you see state comparison data, lost a different number of days to hurricane impacts, all the way down to 0. So that's going to affect comparisons to state results, just be aware of that. And then of course, and we'll go over this in detail, this year we changed our practices about the assignment of accelerated students to grade level tests. And so on the next few slides, I'll say exactly what that means after we get through the K1 and 2 data, which hasn't changed as far as that piece. But we are essentially testing our accelerated students in different grade level tests now, which wasn't the practice last year, and makes year-to-year comparison data very noisy, which is that noisy data Dr. Weissong was referencing. So the K1 and 2 data, which is given in the Renaissance Star platform, is the least noisy data, we'll say, because the platform hasn't changed. The same bands of students are taking the same assessment year over year. And as we go through these slides with you, there's really two types of slides that you'll see for each set of grade bands. You'll see the growth within the year. So this is an example of one of those slides. You see PM1, you see PM2, and then you see the change PM1 to PM2. And so this is a slide that shows the growth from August essentially through December, early December, when they took this assessment. On the left-hand side, you see the current performance levels. So you see the students who scored, the percentage of students who scored level 1, percentage of students who scored level 2, and then the percentage of students who scored level 3, 4, and 5 aggregated there. Those would be on grade level and above students. And that's kind of the way a lot of these slides will look. But the next couple of slides, after we go through the two slides for each kind of growth within the year, so this is growth within the year, the next ones will show growth year to year. So how did we do PM2 last year versus PM2 this year? So you'll see both views. So this is within the year growth, and obviously we have some work to do to build some skills as far as growth goes relative to the state. But I would also say that when we see impacted learning time in our schools, so when we lose learning time in our schools, we see disproportionate impacts on our youngest learners. So I feel like our K1 and 2 students are more affected by 5 days out of school than a 8th, 9th, 10th grader is. And you'll kind of see that in some of the assessment data. And so I think there is some of that lost learning time the first semester is aligned to this growth data.
Mr. Jensen, real
Yes, ma'am.
quick, does knowing how many of our kids come in not ready for kindergarten, if they haven't done VPK, we've already seen the data, VPK kids come in way ahead as compared to those kids who aren't able to access that. Does that also affect these scores as well? I'm getting the growth because they are not coming in already having done this stuff before in VPK, so now they struggle more. Is with the missing of school? Is there any indication of that, or?
I mean, as you know, walking kindergarten classrooms, the kindergarten teachers are magical because they
They are.
they take students who come in and don't know how to do school at all, and in like a quarter, they teach those kids how to do school. And it's pretty remarkable, the transformation that happens in kindergarten classrooms. I would say, yes, we would see kids come in stronger with a greater enrollment in pre-K, the greater number of students. I mean, that data is very clear. But I would also say that, when we look at our PM1 data, we're pretty closely aligned to the state on our students coming in K1 and 2. And it's really the growth we see PM1 to PM2 on this slide. And in that case, we are lagging a little bit in those grades. And I would say, again, I think some of the lost learning time plays a big role in that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And I call that the first part of a kindergartner that had not gone to VBK as teaching them classroom etiquette, how to hold a pencil, how to, that's the biggest part, I think, and I've been harping on that to people, that VBK is so important because by the time you get to K, you've already mastered a lot of those things.
Those skills.
So, yeah. Okay.
And then for each of these breakdowns as well, we always show district-operated schools versus charter-operated schools comparison data. And so you can see small differences in performance between the district-operated schools and the charter schools when it comes to growth from PM1 to PM2 on the K2 assessments, particularly in second grade. So the next slide is that year-to-year comparison. And this is where we look at where we were as a district last year on our 23-24 PM2 and this year versus our 24-25 PM2. And you can see the state change, the district change, and the comparison data there. I think one thing to put out, to point out is actually relative to where we were last year, we're fairly stable despite the hurricane impacts. But particularly in kindergarten, and we're you know, relatively close to the state, both good and bad depending on the grade, in 1 and 2. So I think where you see the greatest impact is kindergarten, and I would say a lot of that stop-start learning that happened because of our hurricanes probably very much impacted kindergarten during that first semester. Okay. And then this also shows you the district and charter school breakdown for that data. And again, I think you can see the strong performance of our district-operated schools in this data set, as well as, again, the comparison data to the state.
Chad, if I may?
Yep.
Derek, this question just kind of came to me looking at this district versus charter data. And then what is our responsibility as their sponsor, the charter school sponsor, to share, let me just ask this, are they completely on their own? Obviously, they look at the same data, they get all the same reports that we do at the district, but we're not required at all to share curriculum or any of the things that we're working on for our public schools. We're not required to necessarily share with them. They're on their own for interventions and so forth?
For the preponderance of them, yes. I mean, there's small things depending on grant funding and direct services being provided through grants that can affect that. But I mean, they have access to all the systems, so they get their FAST data out of the systems. Evan does provide the charter school team here with just the charter school data breakdown, kind of like this after the assessments. But our charter schools operate fairly independently when it comes to how they use data and the interventions they have in place.
Okay. So yeah, we're not providing a lot of district resources and time to provide them support where they see it's needed. They're on their own.
Predominantly, yes.
Predominantly, okay. Yep. Unless we're legally required through
Correct.
an application or whatever.
Correct. It depends on funding sources and you know, those types of elements.
Thank you.
So in the considerations, we talked about changes in practices with assessment and math acceleration, which has been a big new initiative across the state since this transition to FAST. What we've always done with math acceleration has typically happened in middle school and in high school, where acceleration in math was really about what grade level you took algebra in. And so you can see in our traditional pathway, you would take grade 6 math, grade 7 math, grade 8, which is pre-algebra, and you take algebra in 9th grade. That's like the most traditional pathway. The accelerated pathway, you know, kind of the moderately accelerated pathway, really is about taking Algebra 1 in your 8th grade year of middle school. And so you take like a grade 6 accelerated course, a grade 7 accelerated course, and then you're in algebra as an 8th grader, and you're probably in geometry as a 9th grader. And then in your most accelerated pathway, those are for students who really come in highly accelerated in math. They take that grade 7 accelerated, which is basically a hybrid of grade 7 and pre-algebra in that most accelerated pathway. Then they end up in Algebra 1 in 7th grade and take geometry in 8th grade. And so really it's about acceleration has a lot to do with where in your progression of year to year you take algebra. To prepare students for this, the state added course codes for elementary accelerated math. And so with the transition to BEST, we implemented these grade 3, 4, and 5 accelerated, we call them affectionately grade like 3A, 4A, 5A accelerated math courses. And they cover an accelerated progression of standards. So we'll see on a slide in a couple slides, grade 3 covers all of grade 3 plus half of grade 4 essentially. And then grade 4 accelerated covers the rest of grade 4 and all of grade 5. And so Students cover standards at a faster pace, hence the name accelerated. And the change in practice this year is the bold text on the right of this graphic, which is we changed what grade certain accelerated classes tested on. So previously, prior to this change, as we've transitioned to invest and transitioned fully to the FAST assessments, grade 4 accelerated math, which would cover the back half of grade 4 and all of grade 5, would take the 4th grade assessment. But in reality, they're covering all of the grade 5 benchmarks, and we want to know if they understand their grade 5 benchmarks that were the majority of their course load. And so because how they perform on that assessment really informs whether or not they're ready for that grade 6 accelerated course or that 5A course, we want to test them appropriately and in a way that's aligned to the benchmarks the teacher is covering. And so we've changed the assessed grades for some, or the assessments for some of these courses. But as a result of that, right, we didn't do that last year as we were going through the FAST transition. And so that year-to-year comparison data is difficult. Evan's done an amazing job of breaking it down, and we'll see some great examples of trying to separate the accelerated and non-accelerated students out into discrete data sets. But we can't just say 5th grade this year to 5th grade last year, because you have different cohorts of students testing on different grade levels.
Yeah.
And this is a wonderful graphic that Mr. McCarthy and his team made, showing how those courses interact with the standards that are taught in those courses. So like I said, in our most accelerated math progression, you have that 3A, which covers 3rd and part of 4th. 4A covers part of 4th and all of 5th, which is why we test in 5th at the end of 4A. You have 6th, which is our 5A, which covers 6th grade math. So the students now test in 6th grade at the end of that. It would, if we tested them on 5th grade, they hadn't actually been exposed to any 5th grade content. They did that the previous year. And then 7A covers the back half of 7 and 8th grade math, and then into algebra and geometry. So you can see the rationale for the testing change has everything to do with the content the students are encountering throughout the course of the year. And I really like this graphic just showing how that impacts the year-to-year data comparison, because like we said, the comparison in certain grade levels is very difficult because we've had a huge swing in the number of tests administered in those grade levels because of acceleration. So you can see 3rd grade still tests on 3rd grade, regardless of whether you're an accelerated or not. But 4th grade, we have our 4th grade accelerated students who are taking the 5th grade math. So you see a large decrease in the number of 4th grade assessments delivered, because those students are now taking the 5th grade. And you see a small increase in 5th grade because you have that 1,025 going into 5th grade, but you also have a large cohort of students, the 5A students, who are now taking the 6th grade assessment.
Right.
And so it's kind of a cascade that starts happening. Then you have your 6 FAST students. Again, so those tests are up because your 5A students are taking that test, but then you also have your most accelerated 6th graders taking the 8th grade test as part of their 7A course.
Right.
And so those students come out of that. And then you can see grades 4 and 7 are really when you see the biggest decline in tests given, because those are kind of the skipped grades in the most accelerated model. And then your grade 8 tests have gone significantly up because of a larger number of 7th and 6th grade students taking that pre-algebra assessment at the end of 8th grade. Again, just showing the impact of a small change in tested subjects on tests taken and where students are testing.
Mr. Jensen, I'm going to cut in here for a second. So board members, this is why the data is noisier this year. Next year, when we're sitting here, the signal will be more clear, right? But really the reason we made this change is that we were sending 2 different messages to our teachers. We want you to teach these accelerated benchmarks, but we're going to give your students the non-accelerated assessment. And that's a mixed message, right? And it encourages us not to push forward. And so, and the ship had already sailed after, you know, Mr. Jensen and I knew this was something that needed to be
Last year,
fixed this
yeah.
year. The ship had sailed last year by the time we got here and got briefed. But we knew we would make this change. So although it's a little bit, and the schools are adjusting too, because the data is different for them. This is a good long-term move for our district as we march forward.
The students, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Even I know my daughter for sure was accelerated in math and was like, and my son too, for that matter, was like, I'm taking tests and I haven't been, you know, 7th grade, 8th grade, like I haven't taken algebra, you know, and I'm in geometry, I gotta take an algebra test.
Right.
So, I know it makes sense. There's just gonna be this pain and the data that, you know, you just gotta
Right.
get through.
And it's also that because you're testing on those accelerated benchmarks, your numbers aren't going to be as high
Sure.
initially. And so that's working through with our leadership teams and helping them to, you know, understand to trust the process and work through, and that the clarity on the PM3 is way more important than the fact that the PM2 got a little bit muddled. So.
It's also, you know, a need for supporting our students and parents, because these are our most accelerated students. They're used to being successful, and a lot of them are used to taking PM1 and seeing a 5 or a 4 up there and feeling really good about themselves. And then we move that PM1 and 2 a grade level up for content they haven't encountered yet, and they score a level 1 or 2 on that first assessment for content they've never seen. And it can be, they may have a very high percentile rank, but they see that level 1 and 2 and it's very alarming to them.
I've never seen that before.
They've never seen that before, and it's scary, and our parents wonder if this is the right placement. They're used to their kid always being really high performing, but I think this slide shows that our most accelerated students grow significantly faster when they encounter that content compared to peers across the state. And so this is I really like this data set. It
Yeah.
shows the state data, the growth from PM1 to PM2 this year, and then it shows the students sitting in our accelerated courses on those same assessments, growth from PM1 to PM2. And across the data, you can see primarily, I mean, our students are growing 1.5 to 2 times as fast when they encounter the material as their peers across the state. And those state averages include other accelerated students. So they grow very quickly once they encounter that content. But it can be very disarming to take that first assessment or second assessment, be like, I'm used to getting a level 4, and right now I'm at a high 2. Like, what's going on? They will be successful. They're on the right trajectory, but it's because they're testing on the appropriate content. It's showing that trajectory instead of starting the year at a 5, being a 5 on PM2 and being a 5 on PM3. And that is different for some of our families. And it's a place where we can grow with our teachers, with our admin teams, and with our students in understanding what that means.
This is, and again, this is step one in a process that won't fully play out for 6 or 7 years, but board members, these types of changes are what is going to lead to more of our kids getting into AP, Calc, AB, and BC, and the equivalent courses. This is what's going to get more of our kids into physics down the road, into these. And again, we offer these courses now, but more of our students can take these classes and be successful if we get the trajectory right in elementary school. So this work right now that our teachers are doing is going to pay off for these students in 5 years.
Just having them have that extra challenge too, when you have kids sitting in a class where everything's easy, they get skittery, they get bored, they get in trouble.
Right.
And you know, to have them be challenged where they're not just, oh yeah, I could get this assignment done in 3 minutes and I'm gonna sit here while the rest of the class is working through it. That's really nice to see.
Right.
As you know, as a former, I'm sorry. Dr.
No, I was just going to say, we all know the research is clear. High expectations leads to higher results.
Yep.
It's just about having the support structures in place.
I like this slide a lot. And that, you took my key word there, it challenges our students. But it also, with the accelerated, if they're in, you know, 4th grade and they're getting 5th grade material, it's a sneak peek of what's coming. So every year, they're better prepared for that grade level. I mean, imagine going from, you know, 6th grade to 7th grade, there's whole new, another level of education, a whole another level of materials, but they've already seen so much. And we've never done that before. We have, in a sense, but this to me is a beautiful snapshot of when you change your mindset up here and it goes down to the school, this is the results of it. So I like this a lot. I think it's fabulous. This is our, like we did Tuesday, our future brain surgeon, and I can't remember what the other student was about. This is their path.
That's
Yeah.
a great point, Ms. Spray. There was always feedback from students in kind of previous acceleration models and families that kind of when they got to that middle school acceleration piece, they felt like they almost like skipped forward too far. Like it was a rapid acceleration where it's like suddenly you've missed all of the 6th grade content and now we're hitting pre-algebra. The intention behind this pathway is to provide students lots of on-ramps and off-ramps for what's appropriate for them and their developmental needs, but also to create a consistent progression of learning so that students kind of accelerate gently up this path instead of having more of a
Big steps.
stop-start, right?
Yeah, a glide path instead of a mountain to climb. Okay, perfect.
The next slide is kind of the consolidated results that we looked at just for K2 as well, and this is the 3-5 results. Some important context for this slide is that this represents the grade levels tested, so the test they took. So this is, you're seeing, what you're not seeing on this slide is your 5A students' data, because your 5A students took a 6th grade assessment. And so what you're seeing here is your 3A students, which are included in your 3rd grade data, along with all the other students. You're seeing your 4th grade, which does not include your accelerated students because they're in the 5th grade data. So really your 4th grade data is all your non-accelerated students. And then your 5th grade includes your non-accelerated 5th graders and your accelerated 4th graders. And that's why you'll see, like for example, a lower score than we would traditionally have at PM2 in as far as on grade level for 4th grade math. That's because we've peeled out a large denominator of accelerated students from that grade band. It's almost like the new algebra, where you saw 8th grade math be kind of a much lower data than all the other grade levels. It's kind of like that now.
So really, it's not so much that we're seeing 4th grade, we're seeing those who took the 4th grade level test.
Correct.
Okay.
But what I think is really neat, even in that grade level with those students peeled out, we're seeing strong growth from PM1 to PM2 relative to the state cohorts, which includes a lot more accelerated students.
I got one quick question. Derek, how does this affect, and maybe it doesn't, a school grade? Like if you have a 5th grader who's actually taking the 6th grade math test, which school grade does that kid's data get applied to?
It still counts for their elementary school. So
Still a 5th grader, even though they're taking the 6th grade.
correct. So that it would have been extremely. I mean, we're always going to do what's best for students. It would have been extremely detrimental for school grades, though, too, if those students didn't count for some reason. But they do. They just show up in the school as 6th grade assessments.
Okay.
And
I
they
was
count.
hoping so, just want to make sure.
Correct. And they still count for learning gains. They still. It's still very similar to all the other
Gotcha. Thanks.
pieces.
And keep in mind on the other end of that the high schools miss out a little bit because our top students will be done with geometry by 8th grade. And so those top performers going into our high schools aren't taking a high school math test. And so they're not contributing toward that school's march to an A. And so you could have other districts or other charter systems that don't accelerate because they want to make sure they get credit,
Sure.
right? We're not doing that. We're doing what is best for each child,
Yeah.
regardless of the disadvantages in the accountability system.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
And
Generally, oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and that's something that, from my prior district, that repeatedly landed on our legislative platform, and could never get any traction with it. But again, our high, when you're a high acceleration district, your high schools do pay a little bit of a penalty for that.
And that's the point I want to talk about is generally speaking, kids that are on this accelerated pathway are much more likely to be enrolled in AP classes or ACE. And so we're still going to get that acceleration bucket somewhat filled.
But you're not getting a proficiency check for those students, and you're not getting their learning gain
Because that's going toward their college.
if you weren't accelerating. So you're missing out on those two components of the accountability system in high school. And again, there are entities around Florida that don't push acceleration for that reason. Again, we don't think that's the right thing for students.
No.
So then, if they're taking, ACE or AP or IB level math courses, where does that fall?
It doesn't go in the math component of the state accountability system because, again, we
Again,
don't test beyond geometry.
geometry.
They are going to get, to Mr. Kennedy's point, they are going to get that acceleration credit in that component. The reality is, remember that each graduate, I mean, if you take 12 AP courses in high school and 3 dual enrollment courses, you still get 1 acceleration point. It doesn't matter how much you accelerate, it's did you or did you not. So the students that are high achieving in math tend to also be high achieving elsewhere. We would probably get that acceleration point anyway. So I don't know that the high schools necessarily are benefiting from that. Families are benefiting because, again, in full throttle, what this model means is more kids earning college credit in high school, and maybe a swifter path or a less expensive path, right, through the Florida college or university system.
Yeah, okay.
And again, this is that same data broken down as a comparison between district-operated and charter schools. I think you can see some of the impact of where different schools accelerate and do not accelerate students inside of this data. So for example, 3rd grade is pretty clean because all of our 3rd graders are still taking that 3rd grade assessment. But you can see our 4th grade data, although we grew well, that percentage of on grade level or higher at 16%, that's much lower than the state and the charter schools. But it's because we accelerate a significant number of those students into 5th grade and are assessing them in the 5th grade bucket. And that's where you see the larger growth and the lower number of level 1 students at PM2. And this is a really wonderful slide that Mr. McCarthy put together that's new for this year and kind of reflects the changing landscape of accelerated assessment. You can now see kind of the assessment and the pathway it's tethered to and the cohort of students inside of that and that cohort's year-to-year comparison. So for example, looking at grade 5, we have the state results. We have our students in the traditional math, 5th grade math, and you can see their year-to-year comparisons, and they're exactly where they, as far as the percentage of on-grade level students is the same from this year to last year. But then for accelerated, you see we have 4th accelerated who are taking that 5th grade assessment, and you can see they were 44% on grade level on that PM2, and you can also see that they had significantly lower level 1 students on that PM2 assessment. The reason you see blanks next to it is because, like Dr. Weissong said, this is our first year doing that. There's no comparison data for that cohort of students. Next year, you'll see comparison data for that cohort of students. When you look to the top, grade 3 math, you can see a lot of down arrows next to 3rd grade math, and particularly, when compared to last year. And this raised a number of concerns for us. It's not something we saw anywhere else in our data set. And that's when Mr. McCarthy starts working his magic and trying to add context for our students and teachers so that we can take action for the second semester. And that's what we'll talk about in the next few slides.
I have a question on this one, 23, I guess it is. The traditional. I know we're hyper-focused on accelerated, but I'm looking at the traditional as well as we go through this. And we've got an awful lot of high numbers at level 1.
We do. And that's the really intense work that you see in our schools as you walk classrooms of pulling students into small groups and really structuring our intervention time well and trying to use high quality evidence-based interventions with our kids to help students who haven't been as successful traditionally on these assessments build their skill, build their knowledge, acquire the content they need to grow year over year. But that is, definitely an area of concern for us and something we do a lot of action planning around.
Okay, yeah, because I'm looking at PM2 from 23, 24 to 24, 25. And we went from, that's 3 and above, but this is disturbing, the red column for me in the traditional. And even, I would like to see 2, 3, 4. I just think the number higher in 1 is not good.
And Ms. Spray, this is also kind of an impact of breaking the data out like this for you.
Right.
So traditionally, when we've just tested all the students on the 4th grade assessment, your accelerated students, your high-performing students, kind of mask that, right? Because they're
Right.
offsetting the percentage of students
Right.
who are scoring
Right.
at level 1.
Right.
But when we break it out kind of by what course you're in or what accelerated pathway you're on, you see that much more granularly, and you see the students who haven't been as traditionally successful, which is why they may not be, in an accelerated pathway, and you can see the true distribution of those students, which is something that's,
Right.
of great importance to us.
And it also shows us this is the area in traditional that we need to work on.
Absolutely.
And the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. So what we're doing in the previous slides, K1, 2 impacts this one.
But I would like to point out
overall,
in that
so-
4th grade, we do see growth year over year.
Yeah.
A little bit of growth. This is hard work. I mean, we see
Oh,
our teachers,
yeah, I
teachers
know.
and students really putting in the effort on this. But it is a big mountain to climb.
There's also 2 other considerations, right? Again, remember that year to year, we're 7 days of instruction behind, which is going to have a greater impact on your students who
Very true.
have not traditionally been successful in math, right? That 7 days of lost instruction hits that group even harder than it does your accelerated students,
Very true.
right? Who, so that's number one. The other thing that's not clearly evident is that we're having conversations with each principal about how many students are being accelerated. And, if you only accelerate your level 5 students, you're not giving that many kids the opportunity. So accelerate your 4s. And then why not your 3s,
Right.
right? And some schools are further along than others. Again, when we have high expectations and we provide good support, students tend to rise to the occasion. And so the conversation is, how do we give more kids the opportunity to try acceleration? And so as more students go to that path, the students that are left in traditional are more likely to be at that level 1 or level 2.
Right.
Now, the advantage to that is then those students are getting even more focused support because your teacher's not differentiating across a wider
Right.
skill range. But it does take time.
Okay.
I think what's interesting, so I get the year to year, but it's 2 different cohorts, 2 different kids, right?
Yeah.
So the reality is we've got to look at third grade from 2023-24, how are they now doing in fourth grade, right? Those are the numbers we've got to see
Yeah.
and see where they, and so you can't really do it on this particular
Slides.
chart, but that's the reality is yeah, we gained PM2 from 23 to 24, 24, 25, we gained 2%. I'm looking at fourth grade traditional, right? We gained 2%, but those are two different groups of students. So what did that fourth grade do last year in third grade? Well, what it did was 25%, right? Was 23, 24, third grade is now your fourth grade now, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that to me is where we got to see some of the change, and I do think it's affected by, no doubt, it's a week and a half worth of schooling that they've missed. There's no question about that. But I think that's where we kind of have to look at. One of the other things in this question, I don't know if anybody's gonna have an answer on this. It is kind of weird to see though, third grade and across the state, in our traditionals, in our accelerated, those changes, right? Like it's all gone down. So it's interesting to see
It's statewide.
what's happening, right? And I would suspect a lot of that has to do with missing class time, right? Like for us personally, but across the state, there's a lot of schools affected, you know, by the hurricanes. So I don't know. It's just kind of interesting to see that data, like why,
Right.
what happened last year, this year. You know what I mean?
It is, and now when you think, I mean, again, we've other than the fact that it's chilly in here, we've had a normal operating week of school, right? But our neighbors in the Panhandle, many of them
Sure.
have lost the entire week of instruction,
Yeah.
and now they have to pick up the pieces, and that's why the comparison is tough. And Chairman, you're right about the cohort concept. Again, very hard to do in math because of the acceleration. But if you'll remember, like last year after PM3, we celebrated in reading that our kindergartners outperformed the state average, and that we hadn't traditionally seen that in Manatee. So we're watching that first grade group close, right? Because we want to keep that trajectory going. So I think it's a little bit easier to look at in ELA than it is in math.
Yeah. And again, going year to year, like this is what we talked about, I think, on Tuesday, is like how many kids are coming in to our district that were never here,
Right.
right?
Right.
And maybe we didn't even have them in third grade. Now we got them in fourth grade, and then what, you know, how are they even ready for that? So
Yeah.
Absolutely.
a lot of factors.
So looking at that third grade data, like I said, was the biggest outlier for us as a system on kind of decreases in student performance year over year. And just as a refresher from earlier in this presentation, Mr. McCarthy kind of walked you through how these adaptive tests work, and in particular, what happens if a student misses the first few questions. So one of the things that Mr. McCarthy and his team do, which is, again, some of the data magic they work for our schools and for us as a system, is they also analyze, in addition to the benchmarks and the assessments and pump all this out, they analyze the question distribution that students receive. So what types of questions do students get, and where do they get them in the test? And so he does an amazing analysis of this for every test. And as he did that analysis, which is something he normally does as part of his routine evaluation of our PM data, something really stood out about third grade. And so that's what this is a very noisy slide, and I apologize for that, but that bottom table, so the top is just a slice from the prior slide where you see the third grade data. The bottom is part of Mr. McCarthy's analysis of what questions students got as their first question on the assessment, knowing that the first couple questions play a huge role in your trajectory on the test. You can see that typically on the math assessments, and we go back all the way to PM2 from last year, so at the bottom row you see PM2 from last year, PM3 from last year, PM1 from this year, and now PM2 from this year. You can see the distribution of questions. So for example, at PM2 last year, 11% of students got an algebraic reasoning question as their first question on the test. 41% got a fractions question, 13% got a geometric reasoning question. When we looked at this year's data, 98% of our students got a fractions question first. That is a huge outlier, and it's only exclusive to third grade. We didn't see this in any other grade level. What's also interesting is that we don't start teaching fractions until the second semester. So
Oh, wow.
That's helpful.
And
In our
as a
curriculum.
former math teacher, to start from the jump, you open up a test and it's fractions. Come on, man, like that is ridiculous.
That's mean.
Especially in third grade. I don't remember doing
Kidding?
fractions in third grade when I was in school, but I guess, I mean, our kids are very smart.
Come on. And if they've got letters in it, come on, you know what I mean?
Especially letters.
Okay, I still struggle with fractions with letters in it, so, yeah.
So an enormous quantity of the questions our students were exposed to on the first 2 questions of exam actually were fractions related. And one of our pieces of context for this data, because again, our goal is to teach fractions well, and have our students perform well and be prepared for the assessment on them, is that almost all of our students were assessed on a concept that we had just not yet gone into on our curriculum maps. And so we think that's a piece of the third grade data that's important. We're inquiring as to, we call this the test blueprint, like kind of how the test is designed and how it's presented to students. We're not sure if this test blueprint was exclusive to Manatee, exclusive to districts that took the test at a particular period of time, or if the whole state was on this blueprint. We've inquired as to that, but we haven't heard a response yet on that. But it would affect our perception of the state comparison. If the whole state received this test blueprint, at least we have a apples to apples comparison. If the whole state didn't receive the blueprint, then it's a little,
And we don't know that
that
yet?
comparison is less trustworthy, correct?
They were surprised when we asked them about this question.
Wait, how did you see that? How do you know that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and
How'd you
then,
break
and
that-
then I shared a table with them, and then there were more questions. Right now, they're waiting for Cambium, the 3 through 8 testing platform,
Just in-
at the end of the testing window, which now with all the snow, they've extended it, or not.
I mean,
another
it
week
also, it does
to
not
look
look
at their
like
data.
randomized,
Yeah,
right?
it
98%.
looks like something was a little off.
Yeah.
And put all
Yeah.
of our students more or less on the exact same test blueprint as opposed to a bunch of different ones.
Yeah, and it's kind of not progress monitoring when you're testing on something you haven't hit yet. I get doing it at the beginning of the year because you're going to want to see where you're at as you move forward. The progress monitoring is how are we progressing with what we've learned, not how are we progressing with what we haven't learned. If you haven't learned fractions until second semester, how you test it just doesn't make sense.
So just, I'm glad at least that you can see this data. This is great. This is an improvement from the FSA where we couldn't, we're giving the test, the kids missed this question's wrong. We're not even allowed to look to see that the question's wrong. We don't know what variations they have. We know nothing about it, and we don't get to see the test when they're done either. So there's no way for us to know whether the test was flawed, if they were throwing things at them that, this isn't even in our curriculum for the year. It's not in our standards. There's no way for us to know. So the fact that you're at least able to see this data and see that, hey, you just threw fractions at almost every one of our kids when they haven't learned that yet, I think that's at least a huge benefit for us and for our teachers.
It's also, there are many districts that this fact pattern would not have come together this way. This is the advantage of having a very, very strong assessment and research team that can pick up on this kind of nuance and then ask the question and say we're going to demand an answer so that we understand.
That would be
So
very
again, this is why your very high-performing districts have very experienced academic leadership teams, because you find stuff like this.
I mean, just the way you dissect all that data. I mean, that's like, huh. But the story all the way over to the, the percentage and change. I mean, just look, even the state went down. I mean, to me, this, the downturn, 8%, 14%, doesn't really reflect what went on, because you dissected it down to, well, this is why. You have third grade math, and you're throwing fractions at 98% of being one of the first questions. So that doesn't sit well, I guess would be the term, so anybody looking at this data should look at that part too, that this is third grade, like you said, we didn't do fractions in third grade before. It's like giving those kids the little pie and saying, here's a quarter or a tape measure, or even, I didn't get that when I was in school, so I think that fraction really throws that data off a lot, so,
And-
yeah.
On that, when you look at it, now we're comparing fractions data compared to all the other math.
Right,
So it's not even apples to apples because they're not even a close percentage of distribution between last year and this year.
right.
So over the whole test, it did equalize out. It's just going back to those adaptive testing
tests,
things.
yeah, it
Those
drops
first
them.
questions have an outsized impact on the
Yeah.
student's trajectory for the rest
Yeah,
of
'cause
the
it drops
test.
Because if they get those wrong,
Yeah.
and
Now
that's
they're-
something is future, they're automatically
Yeah.
gonna have to dig themselves out as they move forward.
And so, board members, this is all good context for you to have, but obviously the most important application of this is working with our principals and their teams, because if you only have the top part of this slide, you look and go, oh, our accelerated kids are down
Right.
14 points. Maybe we should take some of them out of accelerated. Maybe they can't hit. You would make the wrong decision, right? Based on noisy data. And so again, this is more than just an exercise for in here. This is about telling our leaders that they're doing the right thing, that they need to stay the course. We are being zealous this year about calm sense of urgency. Right? Use every minute you can, but don't panic. Stay the course, and it will work out.
I just want to say, court reporter's up there and ready.
Okay.
So just
Oh.
for the
we
board to
have
know, we only got 4 or 5 more slides.
Yeah.
So
it. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
our other,
And this was probably the biggest surprise of them all in the data set. Again, this is your consolidated 6th, 7th, and 8th grade data, so you will see some
A lot of
5A
change
data
there.
consolidated in this. But you'll also see the movement of our accelerated 6 students out of this data set. And you can see kind of PM1 to PM2 growth.
Awesome.
You can see
great.
PM1 to PM2 growth separated by district-operated and charter schools. Again, I think some of the differences in performance you see in 7th grade have to do with where different schools accelerate students. So 7th grade is, not a lot of our accelerated students are taking a 7th grade exam. They're either in the 6th or 8th data set. So we look very low there compared to the state and charter, but it's because our accelerated students are in the 6 and 8 buckets instead.
great.
And then here you see that same slide built for 6th, 7th, and 8th. And you can see kind of the year-to-year comparison data for traditional, accelerated, and again, even in 6th, you see it broken out for the students who are 5th grade accelerated. You see our 5A students being highly successful in 6th grade math. 81% of them are already on grade level or above. 18% are level 2, and Spray, to your point, 0% are level 3 in that, or level 1 on that.
Right.
chart,
That's the first thing I looked at.
being highly successful in that course. And then you can see good growth, good comparisons compared to last year. And I would say you may note that -11 next to 6A. There's a difference between those two cohorts. Our 6A cohort last year was pretty pure. This year we've accelerated a lot of students into that 8 exam
Right.
out of there. So
Right.
your most accelerated kids are no longer in that data set, which is why you see a
From last year.
decline there.
That's great. Yeah.
And this is the last slide. This is what we do in response to the data. We've talked a lot about this already, but we are reviewing the data. Our teachers are working through it. Our principals are working through it, both in data, at the schools and at the district level. We've had a principals meeting, like Dr. Weissong said. We'll be doing an assistant principal training. We actually just moved that back to the very beginning of February, so they have their English data as well. And then we have action planning happening at all schools. We're doing targeted schools that are going to get individual support and feedback from the entire instructional leadership team. We're going to be scheduling spring school visits based on results. And like I said, our curriculum team is building resources to provide that just-in-time support for classroom teachers based on the results we're seeing. So we're pleased with where we're at, but we're not satisfied. We're going to continue supporting our teachers and students and moving the needle so we can have a strong second semester and end of the school year.
Great.
That was a lot. That was great work.
Thank you.
Yeah, good stuff.
Good information.
Yeah, I think it's so valuable. You were mentioning it earlier, Ms. Felton. It's so valuable to be able to give this information to teachers broken down like this, and especially, I mean, obviously, we're not seeing what students in their class and scores and things like that, which I know they get, which is what they need. Because as Mr. Tatum, I think was mentioned earlier, now you can give certain things to certain students, right? Like you need to work on fractions, but I don't. I need to work on whatever else. So it's great. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Very informative, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to close. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, I have a matter that is impending litigation that requires the board's advice as to litigation strategy and expenses and settlement. If I might ask for a motion to recess this meeting to go into an executive session.
So moved.
So-
sorry.
Sorry.
All right, all in favor of that? Raise your hand, said aye.
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 Passes 5-0. We're going to go ahead and recess and go into our litigation.